Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. Tonight, episode 149, thought we'd chat a little bit about carving, and this week, as you can see, I've made it back to the cast. Last week, as some of you may have seen, I wasn't here, but I think Ben and Missy did a wonderful job covering the topic there, and, well, more covering for me, because, I wasn't here, but, yeah, kind of back to business as usual. It's unfortunate Missy didn't join us tonight, because she's always a little bit entertaining. Just kind of keeps you in line there, Ben.
Well, someone has to.
I mean, it's a full-time job. I can attest to that from the times we've been out. It is a full-time job to try and keep you in line, if it can be accomplished.
I swear, that's my boss's whole job. It's just keeping me out of trouble.
Hey, Steve, welcome to the show, bud. But yeah, so tonight, a little bit about carving. And the reason I thought of carving, because Ben and I were talking about this earlier today, was carving's one of those activities pretty much anybody that goes into the woods, and I'm not painting this 100% broad brush, but the majority of people that go into the woods, camp, bushcrafting, stuff like that, at some point, you find yourself carving or whittling. And honestly, they're one and the same to me. What's your thoughts on that, first and foremost? Ben, like, carving, whittling, same cloth, different?
Sure. Yeah, whittling, carving, just, it gives you something to do. And there's always something that can be carved or made. It's a useful skill. It kills time if you're bored. If you're good at it, it can actually save you a ton of weight. And we can explain that a little bit more, I guess. But honestly, half of the stuff we pull into woods, if you're decent with a knife and wood, you can make something to replace it. Your utensils, your tent pegs, different cooking apparatuses for hanging gear and stuff. Just comfort items. It's pretty quick to whittle something out or whip something out. And then there's traps. One of our first outings, you showed me a few neat ways to set things up. Things that I kind of knew about, but had never actually seen set up right. And, it only took, a couple minutes with a knife to build some pretty intricate and pretty neat little things.
I'm trying to remember. We made a couple figure four deadfalls. That's where we started off. And then I think we did a spring pole snare at the end. And there actually might be a video on that on YouTube. I can't remember. There very well could be.
I think it's the spring pole that I hadn't really seen that often. A couple of times I think I had seen the deadfall trap, the figure four. And, it's always something that's good to practice if you're not used to doing them, because there's a little bit of a...
phone call is that?
It's Ben. You going to say hi? We're on the podcast. Say hi, everybody, and then go to bed.
Hi.
Hi.
All right. Give a wave and off you go.
What kind of phone call is that?
It's the podcast. It's not a phone call. Now off to bed.
It was a Find My Phone.
Okay. Good night.
Always cute when kids can join us, eh?
Well, she heard... I left the office door open, and she heard me go on live. And I didn't tell her specifically I was doing the podcast tonight, and she knew I didn't do it last week, so just curious. But, yeah, the spring pole snare, traps in general, that's one of the things I like to carve out, but we'll talk about that later.
For sure. If anyone's wondering, I'm just trying to fix a small nick I got in a blade. So
did you do it while carving?
I definitely did it while carving. I was probably carving something I shouldn't have been carving, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But no, carving's one of those little activities that, once again, a lot of us do it just to pass time, but you can actually accomplish a ton with proper carving and stuff like that. Much like Ben was saying there, you can make some of your items that you would otherwise be carrying in. The other thing is it teaches great knife control. And it corrects a lot of bad habits really quickly, because those bad habits generally turn into ouchies, and you don't want to get too many of those. So you learn what doesn't work really quickly and effectively.
Yeah. And just the sort of, because you mentioned it, the ouchies and stuff. If you're going to be doing a fair bit of carving, these aren't hard to find. They're little... This one, it says right on it, it's a level 5 cut glove. And they're just like a cotton glove. They kind of got a slightly, I want to say metallic feel to them, if that makes sense into the fiber. But they're fairly resistant to cutting. So if you happen to mess up and grab the blade, or like this style one, I find it's pretty easy to rotate it 180 degrees. And if you're not thinking, you can put a bit of back pressure on the sharp edge, and that would mess you up pretty bad in the woods. With these gloves, you're probably going to get forgiven. You'll notice it quite quickly still. Yes. Well,
yours is a little better size than mine. We've talked about that before too. But
I got this for Christmas, and basically because you had one, and I mentioned it to my wife, and she got it for me for Christmas. So I'm quite happy with it.
I know my kit, and I've talked about this in the past. So let's jump right into tools, I guess, because we're going to kind of come to that bridge, or while we're at that bridge, so let's cross it. So tools, when it comes to carving, you can get as intricate as you want, or you can get as non-intricate as you want. When I started whittling, carving, stuff like that, I used a pocket knife, or my hip knife, or whatever I happened to be carrying at the time. It does just as well. And I mean, I've even used something as ridiculous as this, which is kind of a drop point K-bar style end, and it works fine. I mean, you learn to work with what you got, so don't think that you have to go out and buy a specific set of tools to get into carving. I mean, they're nice, but I've been in the woods most of my life, and I just bought my carving set last year.
Yeah.
So what's that, 30 some odd years I went without a carving set? Because, I wasn't in the woods when I was... Well, yeah, actually, I was in the woods when I was 2 and 3, but I probably wasn't carving, or at least, if I was, I don't remember. Could have been. I don't know. I know I got my first knife when I was 4, so there's... Anyway, that's a different story for a different time. But yeah, you don't need specialty gear. Just any kind of good pocket knife. And by good, I mean one that fits your hand and that you're comfortable with. Doesn't have to be, like a Swiss Army pocket knife that you have there. Perfect thing to start out with. I think you actually have one that has a couple little gouges and stuff in it too. That's a little bit more specific for carving and things like that. And you have shown it in previous videos. Yeah, I think that's the old timer. Is that what that's called?
I think it's 310T or yes, Splinter or whatever. It's a great one. It has. It's not a perfect knife by any means, but it's a lot of fun, and I love pulling it out when I'm in with a bunch of guys and they're talking about their knives, and it always gets a bit of attention. It's a fun one to play with.
You know what? Once again, I consider myself somewhat experienced background. I'd never seen this, and I mean, I love this thing. I still strive to eventually get one. Price points chase me away right now because it's not free and I'm broke. But it's an awesome... If you're going to pick one tool, it's a good one to start with simply because it gives you so many options and one convenient little pocket carrying style tool. You know what I mean? Like the sets we got now, they're a little bit more robust utensils themselves, but I mean, look at the size of that compared to what you just held up. You know what I mean? That's a pretty big pouch of stuff, significant weight and size. Yours you can slip in your pocket and go for a day hike with.
And I have. But I've still carved more with this little knife than I ever with that one because it's pretty convenient. It's like you said, all you need is a sharp edge and a way to hold it, and you can carve. When you get the more intricate blades and stuff, it makes some tasks easier, but not necessary.
No, I'm with you. I haven't found anything that I've needed to carve that I haven't been able to do with a straight blade. Like just a strictly straight blade. You know what I mean? Regardless of the tip on it, the point, the angle, whatever. And it worked. You find a way. You just take a little bit more time. You might have to take smaller pieces, but you can very well get away with it. And honestly, starting off, it teaches you a lot more, once again, about that knife control, how a knife works. And what I mean by that is everybody knows you grab the dull end and you put the sharp end to what you want to cut. That's how a knife works. Well, in a very broad stroke, yes. But I mean, there's a lot of little nuances about like how the belly of the knife is different than the point of the knife. And different grinds are going to give you different kinds of... instead of saying grinds, let's say edges. Different types of edges will give you different ways it bites into wood. Like, you just learn a lot about how a knife works by simply experimenting with the knife you have, especially if you're getting used to sharpening your own knives and things like that. It's just a good way to learn a lot about your knife. And you can make a lot of really useful stuff out of it. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to just sit there and whittle for simple pleasure, but you can. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. The first time we were out, you and I made whistles. Arguably, they could be useful. 100% they could be useful because they were quite loud. But we did that out of sheer pleasure and simply because I wanted you to show me how to make a whistle. Because once upon a time, somebody showed me and I never actually learned how to do it. And then you showed me and now I know how to make a whistle. You know?
And now
Good
you're
things.
addicted.
Oh, I still go out and make whistles. Lily is now old enough that I am definitely going to take her out, make a whistle, and then send her home with her mother while I go to work or something. But I mean, it's not just whistles. Like Ben said, you can make tent pegs. That's a classic one that I think we've both done in the past and probably still do to this current day when we go out. If we can make a set of tent pegs, you know what I'm not taking with me? Tent pegs, because they add extra bulk. They add extra weight. And honestly, if you can make a set out there, why not? And it's just as simple as putting a pointy end on a stick, right? Yes and no. You know what I
It
mean?
is. Although I got to thinking today, and you might get a kick out of this. If you have a specific wood that you think makes the best tent peg, you might be a bushcrafter.
Yeah, and I agree. You know what doesn't make good tent pegs? Black spruce. I can tell you that right now. Worst wood out there to make tent pegs with is black spruce. Because it's, one, it's softwood, so it tends to break easy. Two, it's full of knots and it's twisty as a bugger. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. Types of wood, maybe a different day. But yeah, that's the other thing that's great about carving. You get to learn about the characteristics of a lot of other wood out there. You know what I mean? Which could lead to different things. Like ash, typically it's a straight grain wood. Carves very easy in one way. If you're going with the grain, great. If you're going against the grain, it's gonna finger a lot or splinter, whatever you want to call it. But it's easy to split. Like I said, black spruce, generally full of knots, full of sap. It's just not really good wood to work with. But you'll learn a lot of those little things just playing around.
Yeah. And as you start to carve, like you said, you'll discover a bunch of things about wood. You'll discover different woods cut differently, perform differently. There's strengths and weaknesses to a lot of them. And you really kind of get a feel for how it works. The other thing is you really learn which way to cut. And that sounds weird, but I mean, I'm hoping that there will be a video release shortly that I've been working on that I talk about some of this stuff in conversation. But like, because it's not a man-made object, it's not uniform across. As you cut, you'll realize like on one side you can cut in one direction, on the other side you might have to cut in a totally different direction. Otherwise, the wood doesn't give you the shape you want. It'll splinter and break and chip. Where the other way you get a smooth, nice, professional-looking cut.
I'm trying to see if any of these have an example of that.
What you learn is you can't force a shape into wood. You have to work with the wood to make the shape you want.
Not really a great example here, but this is a rice paddle. Or what I call a rice paddle. I'm very notorious for not taking utensils with me when I go camping. I generally whip one of these out. And it's literally something simple. It looks like a canoe paddle. Just small enough for your hands. But in the back of it, if I can get that in there without the light hitting it too much, you can see where I was trying to shave it off. And
you beveled it.
There you go. Yeah, it beveled kind of out just because the wood did what I wasn't expecting it to. And once again, I hammered this out in like 3 to 4 minutes. Was not really taking my time to make a professional thing. This was a piece of firewood, and I'm like, I'm hungry. I'm going to whittle out one of these to cook some rice. But I mean, that's a simple way to start. That's how I started, was making paddles like this, chopsticks, spoons. A spoon is a great way to start off with things because you can make them as big or as small as you want, and you can give them as much or as little detail as you want. I have 3 examples here, and I was showing Ben right before the show. This is... I can't remember if I carved this one or if somebody else carved this one, to be perfectly honest with you. But this was made, I know, with just a straight blade, because I can tell simply by the depth of the dish on it, or the bowl, whatever you want to call it, and the way it's carved out. And like Ben was talking about, you can... it's hard to show on this, but if I can show the end of it, it's not round, because one way of this carved completely different than the other side did. And if it was me or if it was Sam, I can't remember. But anyway... What happened here was they were shaving it, and this was with the grain, and it took a giant chunk out. And that's how you end up
Yeah.
with those oblobs and stuff like that, which is fine. I mean, it's a learning experience, all good, didn't hurt the spoon at all, but you'll learn that as you're carving. And then there's something like this, which was made with the carving set. This is actually a fairly delicate spoon. I mean, considering it's very fine, it's small. I make spoons for people in mind, and Ben and I were kind of laughing at this. I didn't get this much into the story, but something I like to do is make a spoon for somebody. I'll pick something up, I'll be carving a spoon, and I'm like, oh, you know what? This spoon, because it was delicate, it's long, it's got a small end on it, I'm like, this would be great for Lily. Because it has a good chunk that she can get her hands on. She's learning those fine motor skills. It's small enough that it can fit in her mouth. It gives her a spoon because she likes to be involved in the woods crafting thing and things like that. It's not finished yet. I do got to seal it with something. That's a whole other thing. But I mean, and this one was Melissa's. This was one I did while I was out hunting one day. I was bow hunting actually. I was on a trail. I had my back against a tree and I was just sitting there watching down my lane. And I'm like, you know what? It's kind of an odd time of day. I know the deer aren't moving. I'm going to hammer out a spoon to kind of pass the time. And honestly, I've talked about it in the past. When I go hunting, I'm nature walking with potentially a bow, maybe without arrows. And this could have been one of the time without arrows. I can't remember. But anyway, same kind of thing. This one had a little bit more intricate to it. And I made this as a teaspoon. So it kind of dips up in here. It's so it can sit on the lip of something, right? Without falling off. And these, like I said, you can get into as much or as little detail as you want. But I mean, at the end of the day, these are all spoons.
Yeah.
And that they all serve the same function. I mean, each one would do one individually, but I kind of gave that personal flair for each thing that was being used. And that's the beauty of whittling. You can do whatever you want and express yourself however you want in that piece of wood that you're using. And don't get me wrong, whittling is not for everybody, and I understand that. Some people don't like or are not that comfortable with a knife. They don't see the need in it, and to each their own. But to those that are interested in whittling and carving, the sky's the limit. It really is. You can get... I've seen some very, very intricate little carvings done, like two chains, like chain links. You know what I'm talking about? Like together, but all whittled out of one piece of wood, and they're still independent from each other. Like, you can get into some really cool stuff. I couldn't do it. Well, you know what? Never tried, so I don't know. But
I don't think I have done one, but I think I'm going to try that. It's not as hard as people think.
I don't know. I really don't know.
Getting a really small, detailed one might be harder, but if you got a bit of bulk, you can definitely get it out. It's funny, when we started this conversation, I had the one spoon, which is the one I've carved most recently. This came from the blank that came with the kit. So my carving kit came with a blank, and I whipped this out just to see. And the biggest problem I have with this is I'm pretty sure it is a hardwood. I flick it like I could tell the difference, right?
Well, believe it or not, the different densities will make a different sound. So you're not completely off there. It's probably beechwood or something like that. That's real common to come in kits because it's hard, generally straight grained, and fairly easy to work with.
Yeah. So it is a lot harder than I would like it to be for carving. It did have some problems, and that's kind of my problem. Is I think I did put a minor chip in one of my blades because I probably pushed too hard, tried to cut too much on too hard of a wood. The other thing is it's dry. So personally, I prefer to carve with a green piece of wood.
I know a green piece of wood will carve easier, but how have you found for dry split? Especially when you're doing something like a spoon or something like that. Have you ever had a problem with it, or do you have any hints on how to slow down the drying process so you don't get dry split? Because I have found that's like I have maybe hammered out a really green spoon, bigger one, and then it'll dry, and generally where it's the thinnest, right on the back of the bowl or whatever you want to call it, they'll start to split, and there you go.
I can tell you things not to do. So years ago, we were playing with this, and we were actually trying to accelerate the drying process. And we had read somewhere, and don't do this, if you throw it in a microwave for a few seconds, you can accelerate the drying out process.
Oh, you can accelerate something, but I don't think it's the drying process.
and it does kind of, I think it was trying to make a bowl or something. It was a bigger object. And anyways, I got a little greedy with it, and rather than just stick to the the recommended times. I put a few extra seconds.
Okay, I was going to say, please don't say minutes.
And yeah, it turned black in one spot and started to burn. So it actually smoked. So do be careful. No, I don't have any great recommendations on how to accelerate the drying process, except that it probably wouldn't hurt to, as you're drying it, add a little bit of oil.
Mm-hmm.
So you replace the water with something that's going to impregnate it a bit with, and keep that density, because as it dries out, it can crack. What you're trying to do is replace that water with something that's going to be more stable. So you're trying to stabilize it, I guess.
And that's a good point to bring up while we are talking about carving, especially when spoons, kuskas, things that you may be eating, not eating, but eating with, or a utensil that could potentially hold liquids or food or things like that. Potentially it's going to somehow get in around your mouth. You should seal the wood. One, it'll keep it from splintering because it is replacing some of that moisture with an oil, as Ben said, and it'll keep it from, like the little flakes of wood coming off. This one's not sealed, and you can kind of see how, well, not really because my camera's crap, but anyway, you can kind of see little fibers coming up. Maybe. You can kind of see them there. But anyway, little fibers and stuff come up, and if you're like, you grab something like that, you throw it in your mouth, you pull out, there's a very good chance, and perhaps speaking from experience, you could jam a splinter right in the back of your lip. So yeah, it's going to be long term, definitely seal it. Short term, like when this was freshly carved out, there was none of those little splinters. It usually takes a little bit of time for the wood to dry and then the grains lift and stuff like that. Seal it with oil. And now if you're going to seal it with oil, use some sort of food safe oil. And good ones to work with are like tung oil. I've heard people use walnut oil, but you got to watch that, especially if you're going to be giving these as a gift. Make sure there's no nut allergies out there and things like that. I have seen success with coconut oil. My warning on coconut oil would be experiment with caution, because anything that's an organic compound like coconut oil, it has the potential of going rancid unless you kind of sterilize it or pasteurize it first, and there's a whole process to that. And that's we can kind of talk about that. Generally, you'd have to heat the oil up and you impregnate it very simplistically, because I don't want people to think they can just throw a little oil in the stove, heat it up, dip it in, and all is good. There's a little bit more to it than that, but generally you're going to have to heat that oil up to a certain temperature. What it's going to do is pasteurize it, and then it generally won't go rancid, although it does kind of give a different little odor. It's coconutty, of course, but it doesn't tend to go rancid. That being said, there's always the chance that down the road, especially if it's like in an enclosed place, once again, it's organic. It can start breaking down. The fumes can't get away. You run that risk of rancidness and stuff like that. Scott, great idea there with cutting board oil. Same kind of thing. It's a non-inert oil, so it's still going to permeate in very well, but it's not going to have that breaking, like organic breakdown, and you're not going to get that rancidness. A lot of people I have heard use canola oil, things like that. Personally, not a fan. It's still an organic, could potentially break down. Also, it doesn't seem to soak in as well. I have tried it on a few things, and it always leaves it oily. And I know that's going to sound, stupid. Of course it's going to be oil because you're putting oil on it. But honestly, when you seal with a good oil, these things, they don't leave an oily residue on your hands. And they don't leave, like if you dipped it in hot water, you don't get the oil rings floating up because it stays sealed in the wood. Things like canola oil, I found, regardless of how well you try to buff it out and stuff like that, it's always oily. Now, somebody out there may have great experience with it and have some hints for it. By all means, throw them in the comments, and people can learn from it. I can learn from it, but I've just not had good luck with it. I generally use a walnut oil, a tung oil, and in a pinch, I will use coconut oil, which is what this is sealed with, but I do it in a very specific manner so it doesn't go rancid, and I know this spoon's not going to be thrown in like a leather bag. And leather, for any of these organic things, anything organic, honestly, don't store in a leather bag for long periods of time, because leather itself's organic, and now you got two organics that kind of work against each other. Anyway, slight ramble there. What's your thoughts on sealing wood, Ben?
I kind of agree with everything that was said. Cutting oil is a great one. I have played with a few of the nut oils. They tend to be somewhat stable, I find. But yeah, do your research before you you do any of that. A lot of like the 3 that I have on me now, though, have been on treated. But 2 of them are very soft wood, and I'm lucky they never did crack. Now one of them, this one, which has a ridiculous handle, and we weighed it earlier.
Funny enough, Steve made mention of that. Ben has a left-handed spoon there. Speaking of details, he watched you carve it. And this was from our little outing, and I wasn't going to draw attention to it. But by all means, let's draw attention to this beauty of a spoon there, Ben. So it's a little big on one end, as you can see. Nice little small end on the other one, but it has that ergonomic thumb hold. So, I mean, you can really get in there and do some business with that spoon. Like, if you're serious about eating, this is the spoon for you.
It was surprisingly comfortable to use.
Have you actually used it, like, to eat something?
No. Just, like, motion of it. And it really fits in the hand. It's very natural. Like, when you pick it up, it's like, yeah, like, this belongs in my hand. Like, it feels... Anyways, I have one I kept sort of flashing up. It almost has, like, your rice thing on one end, and then it's an actual spoon on the other end. It's fun to play with your design different things in it and engrave things into them, and it's just really fun to play with when you're carving. You can make it your own. You can make it so it's really fun to play with. And why not, right?
Though it's over there, and I won't bring it out because you won't see enough of it to really appreciate it. Carving can be as simple as making a walking stick. You know what I mean? There's ways that even carving a walking stick, you're going to learn how a knife's going to work against a knot, because most walking sticks, you're going to have to trim off a few knots. How you don't want to gouge into the wood. Making the ends correctly, not just cutting them off flush, because every time you go forward, they're going to, it's hitting against the ground. It's eventually going to beat itself apart. You're going to get that splintering effect. It's going to ruin your walking stick, so you got to kind of round those out. Along with carving, fire hardening is a very other good topic. To kind of go hand in hand with it. Like, I fire harden all the ends of my walking sticks, especially if I'm out in the woods and I have a fire going. Just, once your fire's good and the ground is dry beside it, you can kind of poke that into the dirt. It's going to get hot. It's going to fire harden it, but it's not going to turn it black or char it. Once again, whole other topic, but another good one that can go hand in hand with carving, because you can use some of that ember carving. You know what know what I mean when I say ember carving? That's something else you can look into. Works hand in hand, once again, with using the tools that you have. And you can kind of build upon skill sets upon skill sets upon skill sets, depending on how far you want to get into it. And once again, carving being like the gateway. You know what I mean?
Ember carving is really popular for doing kutzas and spoons and other things that are difficult to carve out.
Yeah. Right? If you're going to be serious about doing couscous and stuff like that, you're going to want to get a decent gouge. I'll leave it at that. If you don't know what a gouge is, you probably don't need a gouge. But yeah, that's a good way to do couscous. I was going to say, I'm going to kind of loop around to a topic we started with there. Yeah, that's a good little gouge for doing spoons. I'm thinking like a 1/2-inch gouge to a 1-inch gouge for doing couscous. I've seen them as big as 2-inch gouges. And I mean, you can knock out a Cusca in like 5 minutes with a 2-inch gouge if you have a wooden mallet. It's great. Me, of course, I would split it because I'm a Neanderthal when it comes to this stuff. And yeah, we keep harking on spoons. It's just because that's what we had here that was easy for examples. But there's tons of stuff you can carve. Scott mentions a tri-stick here. Great way there to learn a bunch of different notches and how they work with each other, as well as knife control. Walking sticks, the spoons. You can learn to carve traps. We talked about that as well. The figure 4 deadfall. Couple easy notches that you will learn on that tri-stick. Tent pegs, toggles, buttons. I mean, literally, if you can think of it, chances are you can figure out a way to carve it.
Yeah, and the more you carve, the more skill you build, the more times you'll find spots where it's useful. I mean, it means that one tool allows you to build multiple other tools. So, I mean, I remember when we were looking into the ultralight stuff, and I found an article in one of them where the guy said he doesn't take a knife. Like, he's got all his food pre-cut and pre-prepped and all that. He has no need for a knife. He understands he argued that nobody needs to take a knife when camping. And I would counter-argue that I would rather give up half of my gear before I would give up one of my knife. Yeah.
I'm kind of with you. My argument would be anybody. Well, I mean, it's Nova Scotia law,
Yeah.
maybe even federal law states if you're going into the woods for hunting specifically is the one
For
I'm
hunting.
thinking. But I'm pretty sure if you're going in for any extended time, you're supposed to carry a knife, whistle, ignition source, and compass, and be able to prove to use it.
The only place I could find that law, and I have looked for it, was under the hunting
I was
regulations.
going to say that's where I'm remembering it too, but I thought I had a game warden tell me that even if you're going into unknown woods for extended periods of time, if it's not private land, if it's crown land, if you're entering crown land for an extended period of time, you're supposed to have these items. And that could be complete baloney. I don't know. I do know
I
it's
think
in.
it makes sense.
I know for sure it's in the hunting regulations because
Yeah.
I read it in the book in the blind this year again. I always see if it's still there. But yeah, I had a game warden once upon a time, or a conservation officer, whatever you want to call them, tell me if you're going on to crown land at all. It's one of the things, if they find you, they could potentially ask you for it. And was that him blowing smoke, or is that true? I mean, it does make sense. You know what I mean? If you go in there, especially if it's crown land, because they're trying to cover some sort of liability, you should have a knife, a compass, or, a method of navigation is actually what it is now. So that could be a GPS, a phone. You just have to show that it can actually, navigate you somewhere. A source of ignition, and a whistle, which is a rescue device. You know what I mean? So it's to help you if you get lost, is what all of this stuff is for. So I could see it potentially being a regulation, but maybe it is just with hunting. Hey, Troy, welcome to the show. I don't know. It just a conservation officer that I knew, fairly trusted, had told me it once, and it always stuck in the back of my head.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've heard it said by a few people. Like I said, as part of search and rescue, that was a statement that somebody had made, and we wanted to see if we could use that to really encourage people to do that. And so we looked for the regulation, and the only place I found it was under the hunting regulation. And someone may find it somewhere else where we could use that, but I have no evidence of that somewhere else. But yeah, no, I mean,
Anyway, we kind of digressed there a little bit, but
yeah. The whole point of tonight was carving and the advantages of it, and I don't see a disadvantage to it. I guess if you injure yourself doing it, if you're not careful and not using some.
But you had a product that was great for people that want a little extra protection. Those cut gloves, they're inexpensive. They don't weigh a lot. Throw one in your bag.
Yeah. So a good set of gloves anytime you're in the woods makes a hell of a lot of sense. We've often said that, it's a good piece of gear to have. So yes, we highly recommend you take a pair of gloves anyways. Getting a pair of cut gloves, they can be used for more stuff than just cutting, but it's a useful tool, and it can save you a lot of time and trouble. And, if it prevents you from cutting yourself, it's worth it. For sure. But yeah, no, the whole point though, again, it was carving, and we've shown a few examples. We've shown the kits. My kit's not identical to yours, but it's pretty close.
Yeah, and both kits have the same kind of premise behind them. I'm sure yours is probably a little better quality. Mine is a very inexpensive kit. I think I got it sub $20. Still good kit. I had to sharpen it, as Scott mentioned here. I don't know if he was talking about the knife or the kit, but wasn't sharp out of the box, and he had to sharpen it. You know what? I'm a big advocate, and even out of the box, if it feels sharp, you should at least touch it up. I find most factory edges, unless it's a real high quality knife, even if they're sharp, they're not a refined edge. You know what I mean? They're usually laser cut in or ground out or something like that. They're real jagged. You can polish them up real nice.
Yeah. Now, I have brought up a couple things. So this is a little diamond stone that I picked up. I've modified it. So because it used to have a fairly, you see it on this side, a fairly good gap between the stone and the woods. Sometimes when I was sharpening certain knives, the handle would bring up into it. So I actually carved out a section of it so I could get right up to the stone. So this is a great tool. I love this. It's a diamond stone. It seems to last forever. It doesn't deform like the old stone.
Yep. The old whetstones.
The whetstones, if you've seen one that's been used any amount, usually around the edges, it's still pretty high, and then across the middle, it's like gouged down into quite a bathtub or a curve out of it. So it's hard to get a consistent edge on one of those unless you're really good with it. Something like this, which is pretty hard and flat,
It's a lot easier.
really works well.
So Troy said something, and funny enough, Troy, this stuck in my head when we started this topic, and I never really had a chance to get out there, but seeing you brought it up in comments, I am going to mention it. A good rule of thumb, no pun intended, for knife handling, cut towards your chums, not towards your thumbs. You have lots of chums, only 2 thumbs. And I remember Troy telling me that. Troy must have told me that when I was just starting at the fire department. Every now and then he'll bring it up. But I remembered specifically. It was when you had the beard, Troy, so maybe if you're listening, you can tell me when that was. You were chief at the time at the fire department, and you said it then, and it always stuck with me. 1, because it was humorous as hell, and 2, it just made sense.
I'm just wondering how this man's got lots of chums.
Well, just don't go so wild with it.
I've never had a ton of chums.
But no, it is a good rule of thought, a good point of interest. One last thing I did want to ask you about, Ben, and I haven't had the chance to talk to you previous to this, so I'm putting you on the spot, but it's not bad. Have you ever heard of saltwater hardening, where people will carve Cuscas, or Cuscas, however you say that, I'm not sure, spoons, utensils, things like that, but they'll put it in very salty water and boil it. And the idea is it'll draw out the water that's in there, like the pure water, replace it with a bit of salt water, and this is supposed to help it dry and harden it. I've also had somebody go as far as to tell me that it may reduce cracking, because Cuscas, if anybody's wondering what a Cusca is and they're not familiar with the term, it's just a wooden cup. There's a little bit more to it than that, but I mean, the simple principle is it's a wooden cup. And when you carve something like that out, it has a real high chance of cracking if it's not dry when you do it, because as it dries, the wood shrinks, blah, 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 physics, you get a crack. Now, I've had people swear by saltwater boiling these things, and you can look this up on YouTube, you can look it up, just type in Cusca making on Google, and I bet you at least half of them will tell you one of the steps is you got to boil it in salt water. Right. And I've heard everything from it hardens it, to it seals it, to it stops cracking. I've never done it. I've never saltwater boiled anything. So I don't know. Salt also reduces bacterial growth. Think salt meat. And I understand that too, but I've always sealed all my stuff with oil. So as long as it's sealed, and then they go on to tell you to seal it with oil after you saltwater boil it as well. So I just wanted your thoughts on this. Have you heard about it? Have you tried it?
Definitely not tried it. I'm not even 100% sure I've heard of it. I can see some logic to it. But no, it's just something I haven't really come across. I believe it exists, trust me. But no, it's actually kind of new to me. I've played with a few things over the years, but generally I just sort of leave it natural. Have had very little issue.
And that's where I am. Another thing I've heard, and I have tried, I don't know if it helped, don't know if it hurt, no idea. Put it in a paper bag while it's drying. It'll keep enough of the residual moisture in that it won't dry as fast as to crack it. Because generally when something cracks, it's drying too fast. It dried too fast on one side or the other. It shrunk on one side or the other. You get stress in the wood and it cracks. Anybody that works with cabinetry or moldings or stuff like that, carpenters, they can explain this to you way better. But it affects carving as well. And I've heard if you throw it in a paper bag, just plain paper bag, close the end, fold it over, throw it, let it dry for a couple months, that the paper bag will hold enough moisture in that it'll dry slowly, but it lets enough moisture out that it'll still technically dry. I have tried this. It didn't crack, but I don't know if it's, you're still flipping the coin and you're just adding an extra step, or if there's actually some merit to this. I mean, sounds logical.
Sense. Yeah, makes sense. It would be a breathable fabric that would still prevent it from drying as quick.
Now, it should go without saying, don't use a waxed paper bag. It has to be a complete paper bag. Yeah. Waxed would be sealed, and then it's the same as throwing it basically in a plastic bag, which you got that airtight thing. Especially if it's sealed in oil or something like that, you have that chance of bacterial growth, like Steve was saying there. So yeah, just a couple ideas that I had heard about. never really done anything with. I don't know if they're true. I have no way
Now
of proving it.
I have sealed with waxes before.
Like a beeswax or something?
Beeswax, and even just like a candle wax, you rub it in, heat it up, let the wax sort of absorb in, and it kind of does give it a bit of protection, a bit of a coating, and it doesn't leave that oily feel to it. But it has its advantages too, I guess. But honestly, it tends to wear off because it doesn't penetrate as deep as an oil can, in my opinion.
Anyway, food for thought. Maybe some of you folks out there have a little experience with this. I'm sure there's people listening or otherwise that have more experience with carving, have better suggestions, have some hints, some tips, some tricks. By all means, throw them in the comments of the YouTube video or shoot us an email and we'll add them to the comments to the description. Whatever you can do to help guide the rest of us along, we would greatly appreciate.
So something that I am going to be, and I have in the past kept in my kit, is a little bit of sandpaper. And the thing is, no matter how good of a carver you are, I mean, there's a few other products that you can use to get a nice, smooth, finished edge, and broken glass is one, but that has its risks. It's just a bit of sandpaper. It doesn't really weigh that much. Roll it up, stick it in your kit. Comes in handy for a lot of things, but you can get rid of the little hairy edges that seem to form near some cuts, and where you just can't shape out that last piece, you can smooth it out. And with traps, that might mean a smoother action instead of the rough materials preventing a quick and smooth action. A little bit of sandpaper, you can finish it up. With spoons, you can get a better bowl, smoother surface. It just works well. So it's a little quick cheat that you can throw in.
So a question Steve had here, what's that? Okay, back up a little bit. Scott, he's been told to cover it in sawdust. Guess it slows the drying process so it doesn't crack.
Yeah.
Another option, I mean, once again, the logic's there. It makes sense. So it could work, same as the paper bag. I'm not sure. If anybody else wants to weigh on that, by all means. Now, another one Steve had here. What's that super soft wood they use to sell in craft stores? He thinks it's balsa.
Yeah.
Acroma? I think that's what I know it as. I think that's still a balsa tree, isn't it? It's a really fast-growing short fiber wood, so it should be the stuff he's talking about. Does that sound right?
Yeah, balsa is what I've always heard it called, and it's super lightweight, very soft, easily shaped. So if you're doing intricate carvings, and it's also fairly consistent, so you can pretty well cut it in multiple directions without tearing and ripping as much.
That's because of the short grain. So, for people that are wondering, the grains of the wood is like the fibers, the individual fibers. The longer they are, the better it's going to be in one direction. But if you go against it, you're going to get a lot of that flaking process. The shorter grain stuff, generally you're going to be able to go in any direction, as Ben said. It's not going to cause as many issues. Steve said super light, easy to carve, just for fun. He's 100% correct. If you don't want to go out and pick up balsa, which is still going to be superior, something we have that you can find natively here in Nova Scotia and most of North America is going to be a poplar tree, or a poplar tree, or what they're really called, an aspen, gray aspen, trembling aspen. They're all part of the popple. Popple's kind of a Maritimes name. You'll hear it a lot here, especially in the logging, but it's actually an aspen. That's a softer hardwood as well, and that's kind of what a balsa is too. It's a hardwood technically, but it has softwood characteristics. Generally, if you can score it with your fingernail, you're getting into your softer, less denser woods. Easy for carving, white. They'll dry fairly well. They'll dry fairly fast. A little bit more prone to cracking when they're thinner. But once again, this is all stuff you can learn by playing with wood and carving.
They say that softest hardwood is.
Oh God, this sounds
softer. What?
This sounds like it's going to be one of those mystical sage advice things. So
No. The softer hardwoods are significantly softer than the hardest softwoods.
yes.
Right?
So some of your harder softwoods you'll get into like hemlock. It's a harder softwood, though it's still a softwood. But I mean, I find balsam fir, of course, being a very soft softwood. It's much softer than hemlock. Popple's probably, or aspen is probably going to be softer. Some beech. No, beech is pretty dense. But yeah, I could see some logic to that, or some truth to that.
And even like some of your softer, like spruce is relatively soft. We call it mid-grade soft, in my opinion. Near the knots, it's super dense, very hard, and can easily mess up a fine blade.
Oh, for sure. And I say this sparingly, but in North America, we're not as blessed with softer hardwoods. Like if you get in over in the Europes and the Asias and stuff like that, you can get some really short grain hardwoods that are super soft. Anybody that used to live in this area, like in the Glasgow area, when the lumber mill was open, we actually trade a significant amount of our long grade wood with Asian market short grain wood, because we use a lot of toilet paper and stuff like that, and they want it for papers and things like that, stuff that's going to hold up. We want it for softness. Anyway, that's a whole other story. But yeah, there's a lot of other woods that can come from overseas, which, you got to be careful getting that because of shipping laws and yada yada yada, that work great for carving. If you get your hands on some of them, they're amazing. I can't think of any of the names of them because I'm not, I don't work with those woods a lot, but a little bit of Googling, you can find some amazing things out there. As Ben opens his book. But yeah. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I mean, this is one version. I know I have 2 or 3 books around, but picking up a good book on carving can actually be a lot of fun. They'll teach you some things, and oftentimes in the front of those, and this one doesn't have a lot of it, it'll actually give you some good suggestions on woods and stuff. And some woods you can order online will come, not free, consistent grain, very fun to work with. But since we were talking about wood types, I want to throw out my favorite wood. And I don't know why it is, but is alder.
Alder. Alder's actually a hybrid wood that we have, eh? Is it not? Because
I've heard you say that here. In Newfoundland, it's definitely a consistent tree.
Because it's very consistent to pin cherry. And I may be wrong. Somebody else correct me out there. I thought a lot about new tongue breaking it in. I often thought a lot of our alders were a cross between ash and mountain elm or something like that. It's some sort of hybrid. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Maybe that's something else completely. But yeah, alder's good. Why do you like alder?
Fast growing. Generally, you can get a pretty straight section of it. Great for making, in my opinion, walking sticks. You find a good section. It's generally harder than your aspen. So aspen is probably my second favorite wood for making walking sticks. Alder seems to be harder, but when it's green, it actually carves quite well, and it's a lot of fun. The only downside, if you can consider it a downside, is as you strip the bark off of it, and it strips quite well, and it makes awesome whistles, as you know, is it will turn your hands purple. Or not orange. Like a dark orange. It's almost like a really cheap self-tanning solution.
And it's bitter as hell if you ever had it in your mouth. Anyway.
Everything already said. No, yeah. So alder is just one of my favorite because it was always fast growing, easy to get. Makes awesome little weenie roasty sticks, which I think was the first thing I ever learned to carve. Is you're trying to find something that's 3 to 4 feet long, straight and thin, and just put a sharp end on it, and it works great. Walking sticks, whistles, you can do a lot with it, and I never really worried about cutting it down because it was such a fast growing tree that it seemed like if you cut a branch of it off, did your thing, came back a couple of weeks later, it was back there anyways.
Yeah, and alder, for anybody wondering, you find it usually in wetter areas. Predominantly, I find it around rivers and stuff like that. That just happens to be the wetter area I'm in. But yeah, and Ben's right. It's the only thing I've been successfully able to make a whistle out of. When it's younger, it kind of looks like a young yellow birch, but there is differences. Yeah. Now, myself, I don't really have a favorite wood. I have different woods for different things. Now, Steve down here said the hardest hardwood is super interesting to read about. Forgot the name, but they actually made bearings and stuff out of it. Not good for carving. So one of the harder woods I can think of here in the Maritimes, at least, is going to be your sugar maple. When its sap is flowing and stuff, it's actually not bad to work with. But as it gets harder towards like the summer, early fall, less sap flowing, that stuff can get really hard, and it stays hard. Like I have some rock maple pieces of wood, and once they dry out, they will almost varnish themselves. Or let me back up. You can fire harden them by simply rubbing them on another stick, and they'll almost varnish themselves. And maybe I'll do a video on that some other time, how to fire harden without fire. But yeah, that stuff gets hard, and I could see them making bearings and stuff out of that, or at least sleeves or something like that.
I looked up the hardest wood in Canada, and it's ironwood trees or hob hornbeam.
I'm not familiar with this one. Is it in Nova Scotia?
I don't think it is in Nova Scotia. I know it's in Ontario. I read about it years ago. It's actually been known to like break plows and stuff. Probably more like an ox.
Australian Blukey is what he's saying is the hardest hardwood, which could be. I'm not familiar with that either. But
yeah,
what
definitely grows in Ontario.
And that's fair. Now, what I've always known as ironwood here is it's a waterlogged type of wood. And funny enough, it's ocean wood. So it's a type of tree, I think it's probably maple or something like that, that's been like dead wood in salt water, and it comes out harder than hubs of hell. And that might add some validity to this salt water boiling. You know what I mean? To harden it. So. But in any case, yeah, we kind of jumped down a few rabbit holes there, but we normally do. We did have a lot of good conversation on carving. Just to kind of reiterate, if you're interested in it, get at it. It's going to do nothing but good for you.
And the beauty is, once you get into this, it kind of helps you learn how to identify trees, because when you do it and you learn about one, you'll kind of remember what the wood you liked was, and it'll help increase that interest. But yeah.
No, I was going to say that's the thing. As you do it more, you're going to find different woods are better for different things. You know what I mean? If you're going to make a 10-peg, I know what kind of wood I'm going to go get. It's probably different than what somebody else would go get. It might be the same as Ben. It's hard to say. If I'm going to whittle a spoon, I know what I'm going to grab. If I'm going to whittle a paddle, I'm just going to grab whatever the hell is next to me. I mean, you learn what works for what. Now, Scott is joining us here, and he has that in Pennsylvania. Is that the wood that Ben's talking about there? I assume it's not that Australian one that Steve's talking about. Also, shout out to Steve there. Recently went on his first hot tenting experience. That was this weekend. We actually have some video to watch there, Ben. I did take a quick glance at it, but now that I'm back to work, I kind of ran out of time, unfortunately. But yeah, congratulations to Scott there. Had himself a really good adventure. If he wants to put his information in the comments there, by all means, Scott, throw your link down there so people can find it and get to your YouTube channel if you are interested. I'm not going to post the link. That's up to you, dude. Because I don't know if, you don't want that out there. Either way, congrats on getting out. It was great to see some photos from that. And the little bit of video I seen it's pretty interesting. I think it was a good time.
Yeah, I watched part of what was shared there. Looked at all the pictures. So, yeah, so I think we covered a lot of this. I mean, we could go on for hours. I could go on about sharpening. I think I do want to throw that out before we get too, we wrap it up with carving. Keep your knives as sharp as possible. It's a good idea to have some sharpening options there. I showed you the diamond stone. I got a little ceramic piece here. But get out there, play with it, really enjoy it. It is a great pastime, and it has a great use in the woods. And when you're carving at camp, it means you have a ton of wood chips to start your fire, which is one of your favorite things there, Robert. So
yeah, it's no secret. I'm a fan of the fire, but I think that's just we all have a little pyro in us. Mine just came out a little harder.
We're all fire maniacs at heart. I've said it before. So, yeah, I think. Do you have anything else to add? Or are we gonna pretty well
No,
try and
I
wrap
think
it?
that's it for me for tonight. We're just coming up on our hour, so I think it's a good spot as any to shut her down.
Sounds good to me.
All right, everybody. Hopefully you learned a few things here tonight. If you have anything you want to add, any tips, tricks, favorite woods, special tools, things like that, as always, you can get us down there at atlanticbushcraft.ca or contact us on any of our social media here, over there, whatever the case may be. It's easy to get a hold of us. By all means, shoot us a message, leave us a comment. We will address them in different videos, or we'll post them into the video links, whatever the case may be, to get the information out there. That's what it's all about. Share the info, and hopefully people can learn from your successes and mistakes as well, because sometimes knowing what doesn't work is just as valuable as knowing what works.
For sure.
All right, everybody. Have a good night, and we'll see you next week.
Right off.